Hi everyone, welcome to the first episode of the Surthriving podcast. I'm your host Lisa. I'm very excited for the guest today. We're going to be covering a lot of different topics, everything from being in your single in your 30s, sobriety, dating, work-life balance, and everything in between. This person is really special to me. We are maybe forced friends because we're sisters. I'm just kidding. My older sister is Nina. She loves to travel, loves hanging out with her friends, spending time with her family. Anything creative and artsy is pretty much up her alley, listening to music and things like that. So welcome, Nina, to the pod.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm so excited that you're here and that we get to do this. It's wild that we're filming this in our parents' basement over Christmas break.
Yeah, I mean, it's as family as you can get, I think.
Yeah. So when you filled out the form, or like when we talked about doing this episode, you kind of wanted to like cover a lot of things. Before we get into that, I wanted to ask you one question that we're going to do on every episode.
Okay.
And that is, you can answer it in any context that you want.
Sure.
Are you surviving or thriving?
Ooh. I think right now I'm just surviving. There's a lot of things happening in my life that I'm not particularly like thrilled about, or like, I don't know, I feel very stagnant right now.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that, things are bad. I think they just kind of are, right? And it's not kind of the low of like total survival mode, but it's not like the high of just like being thriving all the time. So I'm kind of just coasting, I think is a good way to describe it. Yeah, just kind of taking things a day at a time and not really feeling like overwhelmed or sad or anything, but not really like over the top happy either, just kind of in the middle.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I really like that response about how it's not like the super high, not super low, but you're kind of just like living life. If I understood correctly, you're just like living life, and like some things maybe have you thriving in a way, and other times you're kind of just surviving through it. And I think that's a huge theme that I plan to cover in this podcast with different guests and how it relates to their lives and careers or whatever it may be, because I've just noticed a lot through myself in conversations with friends and family that sometimes we really just are surviving, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to recognize that and recognize the human experience that some months or days or years, whatever it may be, are going to be harder than others. And surviving is also part of being human. And if you're surviving, I think you're still living. And so it's really important to understand the context of that. So thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that. I appreciate it.
You got it.
I know we plan to get into a lot. We'll start off. So you moved to Savannah, Georgia a couple years ago from our home state of New Jersey. And could you just walk the listeners through that experience, that decision, and how you're liking it now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I knew I wanted to live in a different region of the country in 2017. And I was working in New York at the time, and it was the dead of winter. I had this decision in my head, like, I gotta really just get out. I mean, I've been in the Northeast pretty much my entire life. And I think there was just a part of me that was so hungry for something different. I said, okay, I'm gonna do this. And I didn't have a timeline. I didn't have, like, a list of things that I needed to accomplish, like, before I moved or anything. I was just like, okay, I know at some point in my life I'm gonna do this. And the decision was really out of a kind of underlying need to experience something different and new and kind of challenge myself in a different way. Being from New Jersey, I went to school in Pennsylvania. I lived in Connecticut for a couple years. I was just kind of tired of the Northeast, and I really just wanted to experience something different and put myself in a different environment that would maybe challenge me, of course personally, but just in a different way. It took a while for me to actually get there. So, even though I made the decision to move to Georgia in 2017, I didn't actually land there until 2021. I was in a serious relationship at the time. I was working in the office. This was before COVID, right? So I had a couple jobs where I was commuting into the office. I had COVID happened. I was working from home. This was March of 2020. I started working from home in New Jersey. I was still with my partner at the time, and we were kind of moving toward living together, and that ended up not working out, so we split up. And then just because of the need to heal and recover from that relationship and kind of reset, I decided to stay in New Jersey for another year before actually moving. I didn't want to move away from my support system or my community. I went back into therapy. I started antidepressants. I actually got sober, which we can talk about. After I felt more stable, just emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally, I started planning. That was 3 years after I made that decision. And then, I'm a spreadsheet girl, as you know. So I started putting everything in a document, and then the move really came to life. I was calling moving companies in the summer of 2021, and they were like, "You're calling us way too far in advance." And I think I just needed to get like a ballpark on like what I could really be expecting going into that
Like
step.
getting your hands on it.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like I just needed some sort of like skeleton or framework.
Yeah.
That way I could gauge like how ready I actually was. And really throughout that whole process of going down to where I live now, kind of analyzing if it was going to be the right fit, I went to the city I live in now about 3 times before I actually moved.
Which is like not a lot.
No, very minimal research, I'd say. I did find a piece of paper where I wrote down what I wanted in a city, and I wanted to be at least 30 minutes from the airport. I wanted to be under an hour to the beach. I wanted a city that was walkable, or at least bikeable, right? Somewhere where I could really kind of integrate the kind of home and housing that I wanted. The cities that I had, I mean, most of them were coastal. The weather was really something that was important to me, but of course, being the oldest of 2 and having our parents be in their mid to late 60s, I knew that I didn't want to change time zones.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that if there was an emergency, I'd be able to come very quickly, right?
And it's funny that you say that because it's such an important factor, I think, when making life decisions. You hear of people like having children and moving back closer to their home state because they want help or support, or the school system maybe is better or whatever it may be. But it's funny how you get into this phase of life when you're changing things about your life and you start to understand the mortality of your parents.
Yeah.
And you start to understand how fragile life is, or maybe you have friends who have parents who have passed. It's interesting, and I remember a couple of years ago you saying that, and obviously it's a no-brainer, of course, but it is funny how you start to learn. Was that something that you kind of maybe realize throughout the process or not, that you kind of are forced to think about the mortality of your parents?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I want to, like, if someone calls me and is like, hey, like, you need to come up, like, I'm on the next plane.
Yeah.
Period. What I love about my city is it's very aesthetically pleasing. It's got a lot of history to it. It's got a lot of Victorian homes. The styling is cool. It's got a cool art scene. It's LGBTQIA plus friendly.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
There's a lot of stuff to do down there. And, like I said before, it's walkable, right? Right when I got the apartment, I was like 2 months out from moving. Everything really started to sink in. I had 3 decades and then a little bit of time. I was 31 and a half when I moved. So I had a little over 3 decades of time in the Northeast. And it just kind of felt like I was not ripping the page out of the journal necessarily, but just like turning into this new chapter that was so different from everything before.
Yeah.
This was something that I've always wanted to experience, and I've had a lot of people kind of doubt my decision and be like, well, what if it doesn't work out? And, I was like, okay, well, if it doesn't work out, then I can move to a different part of the country. I can move back to New Jersey, right? Like, I think a lot of people think that they're locked into these decisions. And so throughout this whole thing, right, I'm preparing, I'm packing up, I'm getting rid of stuff. I had a futon that I owned for about 7 years.
Yeah, I remember the futon.
And I had to get rid of it because it was just so busted. I mean, that thing had gone to war and it had seen a lot. Having the junk team pull that out was emotional for me. And people are probably like, okay, what's a futon? Like, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
I mean, this piece of furniture was just so symbolic of like where I started. And it really was just a symbol of growth moving forward. And at one point I had purchased 2 different maps, one of New Jersey and one of the city that I live in now. And I hung them over my futon. They were in my living room. So I just come out of my bedroom and stare at them. And I was like, okay, like, this is what I want. This is something I've wanted for a really long time. I'm going to do it. And then I got the rental car set up. I had movers come. They took all my stuff. I packed up a cinnamon red minivan, and I couldn't even see out the back. And then I planned to do my drive over 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
But everything worked out. And then, when I crossed that state line, I mean, also, like, I was by myself, right? Like, I didn't have anyone do the drive with me. Our mom offered to do the drive with me, and I just knew that it was something I had to do on my own to really, like, transition into this new chapter. And to come from just an idea in the middle of Times Square in the December of 2017, freezing my butt off, and then finally, pulling into the driveway for my new home was a really, really cool experience.
Yeah, it's a great story. And there's like so many important things that you mentioned. Is this something that you think you could have done hypothetically in your 20s?
I don't think so. I think in my 20s, I was kind of experimenting with like who I wanted to be, and I was still kind of finding myself. I'm 33 now, and I really think that had I done it in my 20s, I probably wouldn't have been like as prepared.
Yeah.
But of course, people move out of their home states for many reasons when they're in their 20s, right? A job, a relationship, just because. But I think my timing was perfect for me.
Yeah, I think that's really important because timing, like, for you and timing for me or timing for those around us, like, really looks different. And I think that is something in a way that I've been struggling with, and I think literally everyone struggles with at some point. So you mentioned that you went into this move single, and obviously because I have inside sources, I know that you're still single, which is not a bad thing.
No.
And so transitioning to a new city and then being single in your 30s, I'm interested in your perspective because I'm just entering this.
Yeah.
How has it been different for you than being single in your 20s and being in a new city?
Yeah, great question. I'd say being in my 30s, I'm definitely more clear on what I want, and, to the point of having like a bulleted, alphabetized Google document of everything that I'm looking for in a partner.
That's like so, like, type A.
It's so like Nina coded.
Yeah, and I think you've gotten more like that as you've gotten older.
Yeah, I mean, I will openly admit that I thrive in structure, right? I love directions. I like skeletons of things. I love documentation. I worked in financial services, so...
Where do you think that comes from?
I think it comes from not necessarily like a desire for control, but just a foundational or kind of subconscious need for like clarity.
Mm-hmm.
I do well in ambiguous situations. I'm very much MacGyver, where, I can kind of build solutions out of random parts, and that's actually what I do for work, not in a physical sense, but I work in tech, so being able to solve clients' really weird problems with like a piece of gum, a pack of matches, and like a paperclip.
Yeah. It's just like so funny that you need so much like structure and clarity in certain things within like work in a space where there's a lot of gray.
Right. Yeah. I think my personal life, I like to have structure. I'm pretty organized.
I would agree with that as
Thank
your
you.
only sibling.
Thank you. I do have an Achilles heel, right? Paperwork is tough. That's kind of where I struggle.
What does that mean, Achilles heel?
Achilles heel, it's kind of like, I think there was like a Greek god named Achilles, and he was like a big athlete and, very to-do and had a big ego, and then one day, his ankle just got all busted up, and it's kind of the back of your foot. And without your Achilles tendon intact, like, you can't walk, you can't do anything, right? So really when people say, like, it's my Achilles heel, it's like kind of a weak spot or like a blind spot.
Oh. I feel like we got sidetracked.
We did. Yes.
I was back to the topic.
Yeah, let's come down from space.
That's okay. So, being single in your 30s,
Yes.
I was joking that I have inside sources that I know that you're still single.
Correct.
I mean that in a good way, not in a bad way.
That's fine.
Tell us about what it's like being single in your 30s, and maybe any advice you have for myself
Yeah.
or anyone in the community, because it is such a trying phase of life where it's hard not to compare. And there is a saying that comparison is a thief of joy, but I think every single one of us would be liars if we said that we don't do that.
Oh, of course. Guilty. Dating in my 20s, I just kind of took whatever I could get.
Yeah.
And I think, back to the bullet list, right, before we went on that crazy tangent, I didn't know what I wanted. Now, like, yeah, I have the bulleted list, but I always say, like, I'm not treating my potential partner like a car at the dealership, right? Like, if someone has a majority of the things that I'm looking for, then I think that works. Flexible, right? And also, like, in a relationship, like, you have to balance, like, what you're going to accept and what you're not. There's certain characteristics or certain kinds of baggage that maybe you don't want to carry with your partner, and that's perfectly fine. Dating for me in my 20s, it was very much kind of very experimental, very open-minded, I'd say. But I also was not clear on what I needed or kind of what value I brought to a relationship.
Yeah.
Now that I'm in my 30s, I'm definitely more clear on what I want. I'm heavily invested in emotional regulation, right? Having a really high EQ, understanding my feelings, what I'm looking for. So I'm not really in a rush to get hitched with anybody. I think in my 20s, there was a lot of more emphasis on, oh my God, this person's dating someone, or this person's engaged, and here I am being single. But being single has given me a lot of different opportunities. This year especially, I've traveled all over the country and actually internationally. And I think being in a relationship, of course, would make that a lot harder. Not saying that it's a bad thing to be in a relationship, right? I really appreciate and value the time that I've been able to have over the last 3.5 years to focus on myself, because now I'm just so much more grounded and more, like, I know who I am. Like, I wake up every morning, I know who I am. I know what I'll tolerate and what I won't. I know how I'm feeling and why I'm feeling this way, and I can get into the root of it and say, okay, like, I'm feeling this because ABC 1, 2, 3, and then I find a solution.
And I think that's so important because a lot of people don't have that. And being in your 20s, yeah, you just like are you're just like grasping for straws. And you're just taking what's in front of you because you think that it's okay and you think that it's validated and that that's what you want. But I think, and I told you this similar, like around my 30th birthday, that I feel like I like pulled my head out of the sand and was like, wait a second. And you kind of like look around. And I know that probably in some ways, in some analogy, like you pulled your head out of the sand in like with sobriety, and being single in your 30s and kind of like transitioning into the sobriety topic, like how did those two mesh with like your bulleted list that you have, but then also just that whole journey as well?
Yeah, I think accountability is a big part of it. I think in my 20s, and even like in undergrad and through my 20s, you know, I was a social drinker. I smoked marijuana recreationally. It was really like a cornerstone of my life and how I functioned. In my 30s, I was just so tired. And it kind of just felt like, even in my 20s, I was just acting and just kind of giving people what they wanted because that's what they wanted. And I was kind of like a chameleon, and I would just like blend into whatever they wanted and kind of like transform. Whereas in my 30s, you know, I'm not necessarily like a cookie cutter, but I'm not this kind of like putty that like you can mold, right? Like I'm a little more solid in who I am as a person. I realized over time that, you know, I smoked and I drank because it was a mask. So when I decided to stop smoking and stop drinking, the mask came off, and I had to kind of reestablish a relationship with myself and say, okay, like I'm Nina and this is who I am and this is my story and this is why I feel eliminating drugs and alcohol is the best route for me. Now, dating sober is tough. It's really challenging sometimes. I think a lot of people are kind of, especially like Gen Z, they're moving toward an alcohol-free kind of lifestyle.
Yeah.
But I think for millennials especially, being out at a bar is such a important pillar of the social scene.
Well, it's also in your 20s, you were talking about like being a chameleon. It is so normalized.
Yeah.
It is so normalized to be crazy in college and then graduate and like move to a fun city like Manhattan and just go out.
Yeah.
Just go out. That's like your social outing, because I think the culture has formed us into believing that that's the cultural norm of socializing. That what I'm trying to say is like, yeah, that's the only way to socialize is to like go and get drunk.
Right.
Because when you do it for 4 years in college or whatever someone's journey is, it's very common in the 20s to feel that it's okay.
Yeah, I think looking back, like in undergrad in my 20s too, like there were some like red-orange flags.
We also went to, fun fact, Nina and I went to the same undergrad.
Hey.
Also, fun fact, I kind of followed her there.
Hey.
We got a wonderful, immaculate education.
Yes.
But I'll be one of the first people to say that it's a cultural norm there to party.
Oh, for sure. But that's just a part of it. And alcohol, I think, was the kind of medium that the majority of people used or use even now currently to, kind of relax, decompress after a stressful day. Maybe if, ease your nerves, if like you're going on a date, right, get a glass of wine with your dish. And I joke about this all the time, like being sober, I feel my feelings at 300% all the time.
Yeah, and it's so funny that you say that because I know so many people who talk about drinking and dating and will say, after like 2 glasses, I'm good, and I open up and I like loosen up, and you wonder, are you providing the best version of yourself that someone can receive?
100%. And I think when we're talking about dating, right, like you owe it to yourself to bring the best version of yourself to the table.
And I think a lot of people are just like nervous. I don't know what it is. Like,
yeah, I mean,
I'll speak for myself there. I think it's just nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And anyone who says that they like don't care about being judged, I think,
yeah, you're not human.
Yeah, I mean, it's like so natural to go on a date and want the person to like you. That's why you're going on the date.
No, of course. I mean, it's you want the person to like you also, but I think one thing that's been kind of new for me over the last couple of years is like, yeah, I want this person to like me, but like, what do I think about them? Like, what's my opinion about them? I think in my 20s it was more about, oh, does this person like me? But now in my 30s, it's like, well, do I like them? Like,
yeah, you want to be so well received in your 20s, and you want to be liked. And I think to be liked by everyone is to be liked by no one.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people in their 30s who were like, I don't give an F if you like me.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's got haters.
Yeah.
I feel like if people don't have haters, like, you're kind of doing it wrong.
Yeah.
It being like living. Mm-hmm. But dating's tough. I mean, I don't necessarily need someone who doesn't drink or is sober to date, right? I'm not judgmental of people who do. Like, I've gone on a lot of dates in sobriety with people who drank at the table over dinner. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I kind of enable it. Like, when I'm out with my friends, my friend is like, oh, should I get another shot? I'm like, you should get 3. Okay.
Yeah. But I also think that it's important to know in your own sobriety experience, there are people like you out there who are not okay with that.
Yes.
Like, I know people who won't walk into a bar.
Right.
Which is totally okay.
Right. I think there's a scale, right? There are people who are kind of more open-minded and are able to be I mean, it's all about safety, right? Like, you feel safe in an environment, and especially if you're not drinking. If you go to a bar, like, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
I had dated someone where we went out to dinner and they were facing the bar, and I could just kind of tell that they were uncomfortable, and I said, hey, do you want to switch seats? And they were like, yeah, please.
Was that person sober?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and so I think it's a scale is such a good description of that because everyone sits, right, in a different place.
Yeah. It's not black and white anymore. It's an opportunity to be flexible. And I think growing up in my 20s too, I had a very black and white mindset. Like, this either has to go this way or it's not happening.
Yeah.
And I had to really, like, manage my expectations. And I think now in my 30s, I'm more open to the gray, saying, okay, well, if 7 out of these things happen and the other 3 don't, like, it's not that big of a deal.
It's definitely interesting being in your 30s. And I know that you have had a lot of different, like, jobs, and, like, I know you're, like, serving food.
Yeah.
At a conference hall and, like, working in retail.
Yeah.
Now work in, like, corporate tech. How has your work-life balance evolved as you've gotten older? Like, how is it even different than last year?
I've taken a lot of PTO this year, and I'm grateful to work for a company that has unlimited PTO. I've taken about 40 days.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe 40, 45. It's a month and a half out of an entire year, and it's pretty solid. Work-life balance for me, I mean, I have a story. So when I was in my 20s, I put all of myself into my work to the point of burnout for every role. And I had a friend who I was working with said, you're living to work, and you need to work to live.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I never had the mindset of the job is just to help me make money so I can do what I love, right? It was like, if I don't work this job at 110% all the time, I'm going to die. Something bad's going to happen. I'm going to lose my apartment. I'm going to be homeless, yada, yada. Everyone's going to judge me. And they recommended I watch The Big Lebowski, which is a pretty good movie. It's got Jeff Bridges in it. And it's just very much like, oh, come on, like, just live your life and don't worry about it. The boss abides. And when I finished watching that movie, I was like, okay, I need to change my mindset. And I think over time, I've kind of loosened up a bit, for 2 weeks, and I don't even have my work laptop. And I accidentally, mysteriously deleted all of my work apps on my phone. Like, I didn't mean to, but...
How do you accidentally mysteriously delete your corporate job?
I had the group of apps on my phone, and I tried to pull it into, like, the app library, like, as a group, and then they all just disappeared.
Okay, well, they can stay disappeared for 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, it's perfectly fine. Like, do not call me, don't text me, no smoke. Like, I'm not compostable.
Yeah. Also, if anyone hears clanking upstairs, our parents are walking around because after this we're going to Christmas Eve dinner.
Yeah. Parents gonna parent.
Parents gonna parent. Nothing like a podcast episode Christmas break in your childhood basement.
It's giving memories.
Do you feel that sometimes when you come back here, whether it's to New Jersey or the home or both in between, that you revert back to like the older sister? Well, you'll always be my older sister, but
yes.
That you revert back to the position of that you act in our family?
Sometimes. So I have my moments, right? But the tools that I've gained from the time that I've been sober and the program that I work have really helped me navigate situations a lot differently, and they've changed my perspective. So I am definitely better at managing some situations like that. I'm not perfect.
Yeah. I would agree that, and for context, it's just Nina and I. I'm the youngest. She's the oldest. We're 3 years apart. So I'm 30, almost 31. She's 33, almost 34.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because time flies. I feel like I turned 30 literally yesterday. Wild. But I definitely revert back a little bit. I've come out of that, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think having us in the same phase of life, so parallel, which I think probably the most parallel it will ever be.
Yeah.
In the same phase of life, I think really helps because we can both kind of ground each other and be like, actually, like, I don't need to play this role right now.
Yep.
Or I don't want to play this role.
Yeah, I think you and I are able to support each other in a way that is very unique to, like, a family dynamic.
Yeah.
I think if I would like to give myself, like, a percentage of, like, a success rate on, like, not reverting, I'd say maybe like 75-80% of the time I'm pretty good.
That's funny because I would say the same about me.
Yeah. And then, like, the 20% is kind of where I slip up.
Yeah.
But again, right, I have different tools. Like, we left the house to go run an errand today, and it ended up being like 10 errands, and then we took a long way home, which is perfectly fine. What are you looking most forward to for Christmas tomorrow?
Just like being together.
Yeah.
I think it's important because whether you're a big holiday person or not, it forces you to, like, look inward and slow down.
For sure.
It forces you to be like, okay, I'm with my family right now. Let me take advantage of this. Because the regular life crazy stuff happens outside of this. And even if someone isn't, like, the most holiday person, it forces you, I think, to look inward.
Yeah, I think what I was looking forward to most was obviously seeing you.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like when we're together, I'm stronger and I can navigate things a bit better. And we can also just kind of exchange looks across the table.
I love that.
Okay.
Well, logistically, I think we should wrap this up.
Yeah, sure. We can always cover the other topics in another episode.
Tomorrow, maybe on Christmas Day. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Let it roll. Nina, thank you so much for being on this episode.
Yeah.
I have learned new things about you, which I think is important in a sisterhood.
Really? Wait, can I ask you a question? What's the one thing that you learned about me?
Many bolded lists you have. I really, like, in a lot of ways, truly did not realize that you were, like, that analytical.
Yeah.
I know it, and I see it in a lot of social settings or just, like, us having a sisterhoodship, like, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with certain things, in a way, there's a lot of ways that I really don't realize how analytical you actually are because I'm not.
Right.
I just know which parent that came from.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. There's like 30 bullets on that document, by the way.
No, which is, like, literally amazing and so great.
Some bullets have sub-bullets.
Yeah. But mine's in my head and yours is on paper.
I just have to write it down. I feel like if I don't write it down, it doesn't actually exist.
That's a good point. I should take that into 2024.
Yeah. I actually made a bingo card for 2024, which we can talk about on our next episode.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's really helpful. It's just a good way to kind of get things going. And I think when you verbalize something or you write it down, it makes you more accountable.
I love that. That's a good place to end.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on this episode. We're going to go have Christmas Eve dinner with our family.
Very exciting.
All right, everyone. Thanks again, Nina, for coming on.
Yeah, thanks
Love
Lisa,
you.
for having me. I love you too so much.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Surthriving. I hope you took some helpful information away from it and are feeling inspired. If you know someone who is surviving or thriving and would benefit from hearing this episode, feel free to send it over to them. Remember, sharing is caring. To leave a review or rating of the show, head to Spotify to follow, rate, and let me know what you think. All information about today's episode, guest, and podcast social handles will be in the description, so don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date.